morning. We're in the Sioux Locks. We are leaving Lake Huron, where we visited some towns and sites that travelers haven't visited since the 1900s. It was very exciting being the explorers along the waterways. But now we're sailing through the locks to Lake Superior, which will be the fifth and final of the Great Lakes that we're visiting on this journey. The Great Lakes house 200 lighthouses. And what that tells us is, it is the waterways of this area. It is the roads. It is the road map. It is the way to see the Great Lakes, which we have certainly experienced these past 11 days, and 4 more to go as we visit the shores of Lake Superior. Todd, thanks for showing us around Silver Islet.
Thank you for coming.
We love it already, but I don't know any of the history, so I would love to learn a little.
Well, it's a mining community, and a mining community that should be a ghost town. But fortunately, after the mine closed down, it developed into a cottaging area and a bit of a tourist destination.
Mm-hmm.
So the mine operated from 1870 until 1884 for just 14
Not
years.
long.
Not very long. But at the time, the richest silver mine in the world, $3.2 million worth of silver pulled out in just those 14 years. Ore from it was in expositions for the American Centennial in Philadelphia, and as well for the Paris Fair in 1878. So it was world renowned for the amount of silver, and also for the engineering nightmare that it was to get the silver out of the mine itself.
Well, we've pointed in the direction where it is,
That's
way
right,
over there.
Yeah.
And
a small island just a mile offshore, only 80 feet wide when they discovered the silver on it, and they expanded it more than 10 times its original size to create the buildings that they needed to go down into the mine.
you've wanted to stop here?
Yeah, so this is just first off, a very typical miner's home. So the married men lived on the mainland. The single men lived out on the mine. And so most married men had a home that was kind of like a cookie cutter, you know, it was kind of like suburbia today, just put up the same style over and over again. So you had your front room on one side, dining on the other. The kitchen would usually be on the side or back, and then a couple of bedrooms upstairs. You'd squeeze all the kids into one of the bedrooms and the other for the adults. So, and these homes built out of white pine brought over from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan were just meant to last for the life of the mine itself. But here we are over 150 years later, and they still look as good as they did that day.
Lasted much longer than the life of the mine.
So unfortunately, when we're at the store, we have a large island here called Burnt Island, which kind of blocks our view of the mine itself. But now we can see the mine out there, which is not much to look at.
Just looks like a little island.
Just a little island with the little trees on it, and it looks different than it did during the mining days, which looked different than it did when silver was first discovered. So when silver was discovered there, it was a bare rock, about 80 feet across and less than 6 feet above the water line. The romantic story is that the geologist that saw the island thought it looked like the top of a skull coming up out of the water, so he named it Skull Rock. That's a beautiful story. It's not true. It wasn't called Skull Rock until after the mine closed. It was actually called Islet Number 4, so not nearly as exciting. Anyways, in July of 1868, they went out to do some exploring on that island and discovered a beautiful vein of silver.
Just a vein that they could see without
an exposed
digging.
vein going down into the lake. So they did a couple of test pieces of dynamite to try to expose the vein, and in less than 3 weeks they got almost $5,000 worth of silver, which was
huge.
Pretty incredible find for them. Unfortunately, it was a small company, so it couldn't, small Canadian company, it couldn't support developing the mine. So an American syndicate led by a man named Mr. Sibley bought it and developed that into the mine. And so during the mining days, it was 10 times larger than it was when they first discovered it. We have to imagine that there was more than half a dozen buildings on that. Don't forget, 4 boarding houses. There were 2 head frames. There was an engine house. There were offices. There was a blacksmith's and carpenter shop. All of that
on that island. So it was bigger, yes.
Plus, it was really built as a fortress because the prevailing winds in the summer and fall bring storms from the south and southeast. So they had to build a break wall, especially on the far side, that at its peak was 75 feet thick and over 18 feet high. So that's how much work they had to do to try to keep the waves from Lake Superior from tearing down the buildings as they did in the first couple of years. So the last building was basically destroyed by the lake in the 1960s. So until then, there was a number of buildings on that. So all of that from that little mine.
It's an amazing story, but makes me think, shouldn't there be silver ore throughout this whole area? It's not going to just be this one little island.
That's what they hoped, and that's why they sunk shafts on the islands closer to the mainland, all across the mainland, because there is a fault of mineral-bearing ore that runs from out in the lake, perpendicular across the mainland. But at that location where Silver Islet is the intersection of that fault with a dike. So dike is an upwelling of magma that happened during an event 1.1 billion years ago. And only where those two intersected at that point in the rock did they actually find silver of a good enough quality to be exploited. They would have much rather found silver on the mainland.
Well, it just seems so strange, but now you've explained it, why it would be in one little spot on one little island, but it is that
intersection.
Intersection. Oh, that's amazing, amazing.
So in the first year of operation alone, they got out over $250,000 worth of silver. And that bonanza continued for a couple of years. There was another bonanza in the late 1870s before the silver started to peter out. But like I said before, it looks like there's still a lot of silver down there. They tried again in the 1920s, 60s, and in the early 80s to resurrect the mine.
As the 80s, and it wasn't worth it.
No, it's not worth it. The one in the 1920s, they ran for one season. It cost them $80,000 for their season of operation, and they found about $10,000 worth of silver. So,
no such luck.
No such luck, no.
So unlike the gold rush in California, where if you went individually, you found gold, you could strike it rich.
Right.
This was owned and run by one company.
That's right.
So the miners had no hope of getting rich.
No, unless they
found another vein.
No, or unless they took some silver. So there was...
Oh, I can't imagine they would do that.
Oh, well, $2.25 a day. As the story goes, Mr. Frew, the superintendent, had very strict rules about being here. And one of those was if you were found with stolen property, it was immediate dismissal from the company, and you're out on the next ship. It was a $10 fine. So what miners would do to try to get around that, to sneak some silver out, in the wintertime they'd throw it onto the snow and hide it and hopefully get it on their walk back towards the mainland. In the summer, some of them would take silver and lash it to the bottom of logs, float it back to the mainland, and just hope that they would find it later on.
That their log would come.
So that's, for example, how when I was a young boy walking along the beach, I mentioned Uncle Jules before. Well, Uncle Jules picked at silver along the beaches and on the mine to help finance his education in university. And when I was a little boy walking along the beach, I came across this rock.
So this is what, you found this.
I just found that. So that's probably stolen property because it wouldn't be found here naturally, so it probably floated in. But we can see first off the load-bearing ore here with the mixture of your sort of your igneous rock here with your sort of granite and quartz, and just the quality, the amount of silver found in there. That's not a little fleck that you'd be like panhandling.
No,
that's a large
that
piece
is
of silver. Yeah.
So you've stopped me at this house.
So this would have been the assistant superintendent of the mine during the mining days, but like a lot of buildings here, the stories of what happened after the mining days are sometimes more interesting. So this camp was purchased by Jules Cross. He was the youngest child of Captain and Mrs. Cross. He was a mining engineer by training, but his passion was spiritualism, which of course was very common, very popular at the turn of the century. And he used to hold seances upstairs. So well known that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, on his visits to the lakehead, to Thunder Bay, would come to seances here to try to communicate with his son who had died in World War I. There's family stories apparently of ectoplasm coming down the wall during one of the seances.
I am sure there are spirits in that house.
Well,
Does someone live here now?
Friends of mine from St. Louis do, and actually it's a bit of a running joke with them because I stayed in this camp when I was 4 years old when my parents were building their own camp. And I always got the heebie-jeebies when I went upstairs, especially with the last room on the left, which turns out was the seance room. So I've never been back upstairs.
I don't blame you.
My friend's determined. She says, we're getting you back upstairs sometime, but no.
No need.
I'm good. I'm good on the main floor.
Me too.
Actually,
Me
I'm good
too.
just sitting outside.
So you have lived here your whole life?
I've been here since I was born. My children all came out here shortly after they were born. I'm in the camp that my grandmother grew up in.
I love it. I love it. I thought I came from a small town in North Carolina, but there's nothing like this.
Walking around Silver Islet with Todd was a visit back to the turn of the century. Nothing had changed except the miners and Silver Islet Mining Company had left. We were warmly welcomed by locals along the way and ended our visit with a warm cinnamon bun and tea at the Silver Islet General Store overlooking beautiful Lake Superior. I had been looking forward to our next stop, Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario, the historic and current gateway to Western Canada. We visited Fort William Historical Park, taking us back to the Northwest Company's inland headquarters for fur trading, and the year 1815.
So welcome to our Anishinaabe encampment. The Anishinaabe are traveling throughout this entire region, collecting food. Their technology is really what allowed the Europeans to be able to survive in the inland of the continent itself. So creating alliances, and they come here for rendezvous, which is the gathering of indigenous Scottish, French, and other people to celebrate the new year, as well as to renew alliances and to create and to do trade as well. So it's a really exciting time here during the summer of 1815. This was really the height. We went from a population of about 50 people during the winter, all the way to almost over 1,000 for about 6 weeks.
From all different
nationality
tribes.
alliance. Absolutely.
Oh, how exciting. But I love that it was their culture that helped the Europeans survive when they arrived.
Yeah. So with weather being like food, such as nanoman, just right over here, wild rice, which is collected in Lac de Pluie. So you may know this from your own kitchen. So this is still with the husk on. So winnowing baskets. This is dried, preserved throughout the entire year. It's traded as well while they're up there. Everything from wigwas, such as birch bark, doing artwork as well, to making the canoes that are traveling the land itself. So the canoe itself is an indigenous technology that the Europeans were able to use to move the goods back and forth.
So they didn't learn about canoes till they came here.
How to make them out of birch bark, the
waterproof.
Resources, waterproof, absolutely. And it's all indigenous technology that came through here. Oh. So whether from their home, made out of wigwas and watap, so birch bark and spruce root, all the way to smoke houses, the permanent structures are all throughout the land as the Anishinaabe are traveling this entire region, collecting food, furs, and continuing on with their lives throughout this entire region. So right here is one of the beavers, which it was that we used as one of our exhibits. So this one's a sun-dried one. This is one plu, one prime beaver pelt equals one credit within the company. So instead of money and currency, it was all credits within the actual company.
In the Northwest.
In the Northwest Company. So these are traded. These are, of course, then taken back to Montreal by the engagés, the working voyageurs, the Montreal voyageurs will travel these all the way back to Montreal. They go over to London, England, to be sold to make fur, hats, and other clothing. And then the trade goods come back over, and those are brought back here. Because Fort William, where we are, is actually just a inland headquarters, but besides that's their main transshipment point. All the heavy goods come up here by schooner. All the light goods come up by 36-foot canoes, and then they're traded during a rendezvous, and the smaller canoe brigades will head back out west to over 90 forts.
So arrive and leave by water, just the way we did.
Everyone lives by water here.
Everyone lives by water. I love that. Now, the only fur trader I've ever studied or known anything about was John Jacob Astor, which began the Astor fortune. Was he connected with the Northwest Company? He
was connected around the Fort William Company. He was actually in competition quite strictly with the Northwest Company. In fact, the Northwest Company, years prior to 1815, was actually able to kind of trick him out of a fort out on the West Coast.
Nobody tricked John Jacob Astor. Okay, well, kudos.
And of course, then we have our wigwam, which is just right over here. Oh, you're more than welcome to come in.
Oh, I would like to. What is the little bit of, is this a good luck symbol or?
So this right here is helping to kind of keep bugs away at the same time.
It's the
pine.
natural
Yeah,
pine. Yeah.
from the pine. It's
Okay.
that smell will help keep the bugs away.
Lovely.
We have lots of different furs in this area. It also tells a great story about the indigenous people across the land before the Europeans came up. The technologies were traded between all the different nations, as well as there was lots of fur. We don't have bison in this area in northwestern Ontario, but when the Europeans arrived, bison was already here. There was already a full trade network across the entire continent that was already fully established. The Europeans just tapped into that already existed.
So that was already ongoing amongst the different tribes.
Absolutely, as they were heading across. So we have the bison from the plains, and they would trade for the otters, the beaver. They would also trade for copper from this area and many different items. So the Europeans just tapped into what already existed.
The shiny one over here, I feel that.
Absolutely.
That looks luxurious.
This is one of my favorite ones. This is otter. Here, I can bring it down for you.
Feels like mink.
So this is an aquatic animal, very, very, very soft, and there's about 25 times the amount of down fur in this as a beaver. So for this little guy, very sought after, especially for the waterproofness of it. So we have a couple different tannings. This one here is a brain tan, so this one's nice and soft versus the beaver that you saw earlier. So that one was dried in the sun. This one, a lot more preparation time, probably more used for donning like a really nice coat or items like that.
For the Europeans.
As well as the Anishinaabe in the area as well. They did make cloaks and vests and everything out of all the furs as well. Used quite heavily.
Well, it gets very cold here, I assume.
It does quite get cold.
Not today, but
not today. This is a summer wigwam. As you can see, there's just one layer of birch bark on the outside. During the winter encampments, as you head up north, there's another layer on the inside, and it's actually full of different moss to keep everyone warm. Moss and different items that will help keep the everything nice and dry, very nice and warm. And then, of course, we have our spot up there where all the smoke can get out, and one very small fire can heat this entire area to keep a whole family warm.
It's ingenious. We may be going back to that.
Well, if you'd like to come with me, I'd like to take you over and show you some of the items that we're traded for.
I would like to see that.
In this area, there was really strong alliances between the Anishinaabe and the Northwest Company, because the Northwest Company was the chief rival to the Hudson Bay Company until they merged in 1821. Well, since we're here, I'd like to welcome you to Fort William, the inland headquarters of the Northwest Company, the transshipment point of all trade goods going east and west on the continent.
That Thunder Bay, current Thunder Bay, which I'm probably not supposed to discuss with you, but is still the gateway to the west. So it was and is.
It still is to this day, over 200 years later. Well, why don't we head inside and I'll treat you to some regale. Which all the voyageurs...
What is regale?
Well, regale is the bread that was given to people when they arrived here after their voyage as kind of a reward for paddling for 6 weeks or 12 weeks just to get here.
Regale is the bread. What was the beverage of choice?
Oh, well, there are several of the ones, depending on who you were. If you were shrub, if you were a voyageur, or maybe a sailor such as myself, or if you're lucky enough, high wine, port, and potentially some scotch during the high season.
It was high living here.
It was. Well, this was the place of influence and power within the Northwest Company, heading all the way across the continent.
And this looks much more modern than I anticipated, the Great Hall.
So
maybe it's the paint, I don't know. It just looks much more modern.
Well, being the inland headquarters, the company spent a lot of money to make it and feel like it was you're in Montreal or you're in a grand place. If you have investors potentially coming here, you want to show off how wealthy your company is. So this is our Great Hall right here. Actually, I did promise you some regale, so if you just head me over this way.
I would like that, thank you. It looks like you've got the old glass in as well.
That glass was shipped in over the schooners. It was shipped in over from France.
You can tell how authentic. It's beautiful glass.
I loved reliving the experience of a visitor from the early 1800s. I tasted the bread, we roasted the coffee beans, drank fresh, cold water from the same fountain that they had used, and tried my hand, with more or less success, at tinsmithing.
it was definitely quite the enterprise. So we had all those trade goods that were coming here, but some of them we had to make here. So to do that, we have our tinsmith, our blacksmith, our carpenter, so that we could make those trade goods to send those out west, because it was easier to get the heavy items.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Henri.
So, as a tinsmith, today we are going to be making a tin cup to
Lovely.
be sent further out west and traded away.
Beautiful cup.
Everything starts as a flat blank like this, right? So this is our template that we'll lay out to eventually make that. As you can see, it sort of starts coming together in your mind. A big part of tinsmithing is envisioning how it will happen.
Okay.
So we are going to fold over that top rim to
make
insert a wire underneath and
Okay.
make that drinking lip.
All
So
right.
the first thing I'm going to do here is scribe out a line for you
All right.
that tells you exactly where you're going to strike to fold that metal over.
Now this,
So we're just
you're
running it.
trusting a novice.
So you'll probably, are you right-handed?
Yes.
Perfect. You'll probably want to stand where I am once
Okay.
I pass this off to you. So first and foremost, I'll find my line and line it up exactly with the edge. Tap down corner number 1. Then we go to corner number 2 here. You can see now
That you're on the line.
it's hooked itself in place, right?
All right.
So generally speaking, you just need to follow along.
And not hit my fingers.
That's the important part. But the nice thing is it's a rawhide mallet, so if you do hit your fingers, you won't really damage anything.
All right. All right. I'm
You'll
okay.
need to clamp it with that hand like you are.
I got it.
All you can do here, rather than striking in like that, think about striking
Down. All right.
and folding this piece along that edge. Just like that. Perfect.
I never knew I was a tinsmith apprentice.
Well, now you are. Perfect. How's it looking?
A little apprentice-like.
That's all right. I think it'll do.
I think it'll do.
So ideally, if we were making a cup, you would want that to be as even as possible. But for your first time, perfect.
Hey, Cuddles. Aw. Come here. Aren't you sweet? Aren't you
feel
beautiful?
how soft the fleece is just on them?
Look at you. You come when called. You're beautiful. Hey, guy. Oh, feel it. Nice horns. Oh, he does like me. She does like being petted. Hi. Hi, Cuddles.
This
Hi.
one's the start of the show down here.
I
Especially when
think
we
she
bring out
knows
our
it.
education group, so just come over and all the kids flock right over to her. Welcome to our canoe shed. This is the factory where the birch bark canoes are made here within the Northwest Company at Fort William. All these are made by hand here by our canoe builder.
What a factory of canoes. They're beautiful.
We'll create many each year of the North Canoe, so these are about 26 to 28 feet long. These will only head west of here because the rivers are much smaller. All the canoes that are heading east are just like this one, just right up here.
The great big ones are heading east
These ones are
into Lake Superior.
Lake Superior all the way down to Montreal on a 6-week voyage. And those are about 36 feet long.
They're huge.
But that is the transport truck of 1815.
Our final stop in Thunder Bay was at the stunning Kakabeka Falls. To visit Niagara Falls at the beginning and Kakabeka Falls at the end bookended a perfect voyage. We sailed on to our final stop where we disembarked in Duluth, Minnesota. My one regret on this voyage is that I had not planned to extend my trip with a stay to explore this fascinating city. Next time, I will. After cruising around all 5 of the Great Lakes, I can't even begin to describe all the discoveries and wonderful people I met. These lakes gave birth to the cities, towns, and parks that now dot their shores that we visited. From the stunning beauty of Lake Superior to the urban landscapes of Lake Erie, I understand why they are called great. A cursory reading of the itinerary may hint at what will unfold as the ship crisscrosses between Canada and the United States. Toronto, Welland Canal, Niagara Falls, Cleveland, Detroit, Alpena, Algoma, Mackinac Island, Georgian Bay, Sioux Locks, Silver Islet, Thunder Bay, and Duluth. But it doesn't begin to share the magic and wonders of discovering these lakes from the water, the very way that they were settled. We embarked in Toronto on the shores of Lake Ontario after learning about distilleries and beaver tails. After squeezing through the Welland Canal, we entered Lake Erie, and our visit to Niagara Falls left me awestruck, as did the wonderful taste of ice wines grown in the region. Cleveland, Ohio was full of surprises, but also a most anticipated visit to the iconic Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Detroit and nearby Dearborn, Michigan, took me back to the days of the Model T and the genius and creativity of men like Henry Ford, who changed the lives of everyday Americans almost overnight. Lake Huron took us from urban to natural landscapes in Alpena, Michigan, where we learned about maritime history and the prehistoric-looking invasive sea lamprey. In Lake Michigan, the welcome at the pier in Algoma was the most memorable, though visits to the wineries and a craft beer distillery were also quite warming. Mackinac Island was a world apart from all we had experienced thus far. Horse-drawn carriages, high tea, and a return to the life of the Gilded Age brought history alive. All 3 stops in Georgian Bay were distinctive. The hike through Killbear Provincial Park was probably my most memorable. It was stunning, except for the snakes. And though I learned a lot from the ranger, I am still not comfortable with snakes. Transiting the Sioux Locks to enter Lake Superior felt like we had truly entered another century. Silver Islet and Fort William Historical Park, though a century apart, told the history of mining and fur trading in this region. The real lesson to me at Fort William was how much the First Nations taught the Europeans, and how for many years their peaceful coexistence enhanced the lives of both. The urban and natural treasures found along the shores of the Great Lakes amazed me. Each port was unique, each city, village, park, and bay distinct, and many are just now becoming rediscovered by travelers for the many treasures they possess. It's a region that can only be fully appreciated when exploring from the waters of the lakes they call great.